Hello and welcome to the HotSeat. I'm Martin Rogers here with Dr. Jill Stuart, expert in outer space politics, Editor-in-Chief of the Elsevier Space Policy Journal and Trustee of METI International. We're here to discuss a number of issues relating to space. Welcome, Jill.
Thanks.
So first of all, what is METI?
So within the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence community, SETI, there's a disagreement on whether or not we should be doing what's called passive SETI or active SETI. So passive SETI is just listening for signals from extraterrestrial intelligence, whereas active SETI, or METI, refers to messaging extraterrestrial intelligence. So it's actively composing and sending out messages to try and make contact with extraterrestrial intelligence.
So who's involved in the METI project?
So anyone who has the capability to listen to the stars at night is doing SETI. So SETI is itself sort of a generic term. But now there are increasingly people who are organized around projects relating to METI. So the Breakthrough Initiative was announced recently, which is a project that is going to be, there will be a prize given to the best message composed as judged by a panel. And there's also my organization, which is METI International. And we consist of a group of scientists and artists and social scientists. And we are seeking to engage with the public and also with academia to start discussions about what sort of messages we should be composing, how we represent ourselves, and whether or not we should be transmitting, whether or not those transmissions should be regulated, and so on.
And so what are some of the issues involved with this project?
So some people feel quite strongly that we shouldn't be sending messages out because extraterrestrial intelligence might not be altruistic, or they may come and unintentionally harm us, say if they bring viruses that we aren't accustomed to. The thing is we've been leaking signals into the universe for around a century. So there's a spectrum of people. There are some who feel on the most conservative end that we should not only not be sending messages out, but that we should be restricting the amount of messages that we are leaking. So this is the concept of sort of hiding under a rock. The idea being that if you shout out into a jungle, you might attract tigers. Then on the other end of the spectrum, you have people such as myself who believe that not only would it be fascinating to contact extraterrestrial intelligence, but that if anything, they may help us. So we're in a position where we're facing potentially catastrophic climate change, the threat from comets and asteroids, these sorts of things. And if they have survived to the point that they're evolved enough to make contact with us, they will have survived that period in their own evolution. So they may be able to come and help us. But it's a very polarizing issue. The other thing that I would say is I believe that part of the reason we should be doing METI, although I believe that it's likely that extraterrestrial intelligence will have evolved in the universe. I think it's arrogant to think that we are the only species that have evolved intelligence. I think, unfortunately, the likelihood that we will overlap with them in the chronology of the universe is pretty low. But the process of thinking through METI is of value in and of itself because it forces us to think about how we represent ourselves and forces us to have these discussions about who we are and what we would say to extraterrestrial intelligence. So we're searching the universe to find ourselves.
So what are some of the regulations relating to METI, SETI in this project?
Again, this is one of the topics that my organization, METI International, is hoping to engage with, is what regulations there should be. At present, there aren't any. The United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs presumably would play a role if we were to receive contact from extraterrestrial intelligence, but there isn't any specific protocol. And that's one of the discussions that we need to be having.
So moving on from METI, recently there have been more active moves to find and mine minerals from asteroids. Can you tell us some of the issues surrounding that?
So the reason this has been in the news recently is because the United States Senate passed a bill in November of 2015 called the Commercial Space Act, which seeks to pave the way to giving commercial entities based in the United States the ability to claim any resources that they might extract from outer space, so presumably from mining asteroids for rare minerals, for example, or in particular mining resources that could be used as fuel in outer space, so not necessarily bringing it back down to Earth, but getting it and then using it for further travel in outer space. The reason this is controversial is because the main treaty that governs outer space is the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. It's been widely ratified and is sometimes referred to as the Constitution of Outer Space. And it states that no nation state may lay sovereign claim to any celestial body. So outer space is for the common heritage of mankind. It can't be owned. However, it states that no nation state may lay sovereign claim to a celestial body, so that opens up the possibility for commercial entities to lay claim. Also, it's simply that when the treaty was written, mining was not really on anybody's mind. So now that we're getting to the point where it's potentially economically viable and physically possible, we're needing to unpack the legislation and think more about how we should regulate it. So the United States has passed this legislation, but really it's going to, in my opinion, it should go back to the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, where they will, and the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, where it can be discussed as to whether or not resources can be owned, if so, who by, and how do we regulate that.
So to stay with the commercial use of outer space, very recently there has been a relaunch of the Virgin Galactic project. So what implications does that have for the commercial use of space?
Sure. So Virgin Galactic has relaunched just today. They had a setback in 2014 when they had one of their test flights crash. The commercial space tourism industry has continued on since then. I think it delayed the timeline. Also, legislation in the United States is progressing to allow for the monitoring of safety of these flights and so on. In my opinion, this is something that will happen. There's clearly interest. Virgin has sold some 700 tickets at the price of between $200,000 and $250,000. And after the crash, not that many people chose to retract their ticket purchases. So there's clearly an interest in it. One thing that I would say is that I think we should use the phrase space adventure rather than space tourism. Tourism makes it sound more mundane. I think this will be more like climbing Everest. It's going to be a very elite group of people who are willing to take the risk. So it's not something where you're going to pack up your kids and go to space for the weekend. I think for a long time it's still going to be that extreme sport type of thing. But I think that it will continue. The timelines on these things always get delayed, and I still think that we're probably going to, it's going to take some time for us to get there. But where there's a will, there's a way. Where there are people who are ready to pay, then I think it's likely to happen. And so it's a push and pull between these companies who are driving forward with this. It's not only Virgin Galactic, there's also SpaceX and Blue Lagoon. And the legislation both at the domestic level, so within the United States, and also at the international level, so through the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, that we have to think about how we want to regulate that industry without stifling it.
Great. Thank you very much, Jill. You're off the hot seat.
Thank you.